obligation to ensure that we consult as widely as possible all stakeholders that are either working with an existing piece of legislation or are going to be affected by legislation that is going to be developed. In the strict sense, any piece of legislation that is developed affects every person in Zambia. But due to the limitations of time and resources, we are not always able to consult everyone. So we will normally, with an instructing ministry or an instructing organization, map out relevant stakeholders. Those are people that are either specifically working on a piece of legislation or are going to be affected by it. It would include law enforcement, representation from various government ministries. We'll always also identify civil society organizations that are working in the area. We sometimes also identify individuals that have expertise in a particular area. We work with academics as well, and the media. So with CCTV, we carried out consultations in the same manner that we do on most of our projects, and the categories that I just listed were involved. We also extended to include private sector. We had representation from some security companies, we had representation from banks, Zldc, and a few others that participated in that particular process. And we will carry out a review of existing legislation as well, local legislation and other mechanisms, to see if there's any legislation that is related to the proposed legislation. So if you go through our project report on this particular one, you will find a number of pieces of legislation that are already in existence, such as the Data Protection Act, the Penal Code, and a few other pieces of legislation that would have to relate to the proposed piece of legislation. And when we have conducted our consultations with stakeholders, we also conduct a comparative review of other jurisdictions that are identified either in the region or at international level, those that are identified to have developed similar legislation. And we document best practices to see what we can learn from those jurisdictions and what would be applicable to Zambia. We also look at international and regional treaties. In this case, we're talking about CCTV, so there's questions and issues of privacy rights. So we look at those aspects and those areas and see what aspects should be incorporated in a particular piece of legislation. And if you look at the legislation on CCTV, it's also a balance between security concerns and also privacy rights and other related rights. We then develop a bill, which we again subject to stakeholders, because it is also very important that when a piece of legislation is developed, not only is it relevant to society, but it is also applicable. So we then subject the bill to stakeholders to get their input and get their review and their comments on whether or not what is proposed is applicable, it is practical, and it is relevant to the needs of the Zambian society. And sometimes law review processes are also necessitated by bottlenecks or difficulties that are identified in legislation. So again, that also gives us an opportunity to see if we have addressed some of those challenges. It also gives us an opportunity to give feedback to those. And by the time we are finalizing the process, we'll take back the bill and our project report. Our report will detail the whole process. It will detail the recommendations that we have received from stakeholders and the recommendations that we have made. We validate those and then we hand over to the instructing institution.
Okay.
Public. We also undertake law reform initiatives, either on the instructions of the Ministry of Justice or other instructing ministries. And increasingly, we've also been taking instructions from civil society organizations, and a member of the public can also walk in and give us instructions. You were discussing the interesting Kabata situation.
Right.
So if someone decided to give us instructions to look into that particular provision, which seems to be problematic, as a commission we are mandated to carry out that work and make recommendations. Then we also carry out law review in areas where new laws must be developed, like the CCTV legislation. That was work that we carried out on instructions of the Ministry of Affairs.
Okay, so as a commission, you have been working on a law review project on the development of a CCTV public protection bill. Last month, you handed over to the Minister of Home Affairs, Honorable Jack Mwimbu, and Internal Security, tell us the background to this project and what necessitated the draft bill. I'll let you respond to that.
Okay. Presence also includes institutions. Today, CCTV has become more affordable, and a lot of people are resorting to use CCTV as a way of enhancing their security. However, we do not have a specific legal framework to regulate the use of CCTV. So it is against that background that the Zambia Law Development Commission was approached by the Ministry of Home Affairs to develop a comprehensive legal framework to regulate the use of CCTV, so that we can try to come up with a law that will enhance security, national security, as well as a law that is going to protect the right to privacy and other related rights.
Okay. Now, what processes were undertaken by the Commission on this law review project, and to what extent did the public and other organizations...
So the provision on licensing for one to install CC television system, one would have to acquire a license. We also made recommendations on ensuring that the areas that are going to be subject to this particular piece of legislation are clearly defined within the bill. So as Mira was explaining, the bill clearly stipulates what is a public space. It also clearly stipulates what a private space that is accessible to the public is. Then the command center is headed by a committee, and there's a recommendation on composition of the committee which goes beyond law enforcement agencies. It also includes institutions like the Human Rights Commission and others that will look into the areas of ensuring that the rights of citizens are protected. Then there's also provisions that relate to protection of privacy rights, because as you know, if you're going to be recorded on someone's camera, much as I think social media has shown us that we all like being stars, most people would like that it is done with their consent or their permission. And the other aspects that Miwa pointed out, if you enter a public premise, there's a notice given that you are
as a place where admission is granted, or where I have a right to go. For example, if you have malls such as Central Mall, Pinnacle Mall, Mandayo Mall, those are private premises. They are owned by private persons or companies. So they are not public spaces. But everyone has a right to go to Mandayo. At any given time, I can start off from my home to say I'm going to Mandayo, and no one will prevent me from doing that. So I have a right to go there because the right of admission is guaranteed. But it's different from my home. You can plan to come and visit me, and it is up to me to admit you or not to admit you. I can tell you to say, no, you are not entering. This is my private space. So what the bill intends to regulate are the private spaces where everyone has the right to go to, or where a person can go at will without receiving any barrier. But if you have your flats, those are private premises. So the bill does not extend to that. But how do you ensure that lodges and even private spaces which are using CCTV are known by the government? And we are saying in the bill and the report that for anyone who has bought CCTV, before installation, they must apply for a license. So by the very fact that a person, even a private person who is installing CCTV on private premises, will need a license to start with, or to notify the authorities to say, I am installing CCTV. That is a good measure. And in case of any violation, such that if the CCTV is unlawfully used, the National Command Center officers who will be present at national level and at provincial level have been given, we have proposed some powers to the National Command Center and the officers to even conduct searches. So any unlawful use of CCTV can be noticed or can be detected, so to say, and the punitive measures will apply.
Okay.
maybe just to add a point.
That details the procedure for installing CCTV. So the area is not regulated, And as my director indicated in a first response, she said our role as Zambia Law Development Commission also includes developing laws in new areas where we do not have a regulatory framework. So in this particular case, Joseph, we are saying the government has identified that the use of CCTV is not regulated by any law in the country. Or if we have some pieces of legislation that may be relevant, they are scattered in different pieces of legislation. And now government is of the position that there must be a comprehensive legal framework that will detail how you go up the penal code. So it is also unlawful. And there are several examples that I can give, but the bottom line is the understanding that should be attached to unlawful is simply that something that is not allowed by law, something that people should not do, and there is a law that says you should not do this. It is unlawful, and if it is captured under this particular law, it will still be considered to be unlawful.
Okay.
If I may just add, maybe just quick ones to summarize. For for this particular law, the rules are that if you're going to have CC television, you need to get a license. You also need to give notice that you will have CC television cameras on your premises. The other rules are that this applies if it's a public space or if it's a private premise that the public is going to access. Then the don'ts are that you do not violate, I think as Miguel has said, people's privacy. And also in terms, he asked about whether it applies to the cyberspace. One of the things we have to do when we develop a new piece of legislation is also look at other pieces of legislation that are existing so that we do not duplicate provisions or we do not end up with conflicts. So in terms of the cyberspace, this law specifically deals with closed circuit television systems. So for the cyberspace, we have what some people are calling the proposed bill. We have the bill that was enacted last year on cyberbullying that relates to issues of the cyberspace. We've also got the Data Protection Act, which deals with electronic data. So there are a number of other pieces of legislation that generally apply to the cyberspace. Then we had a question on how much consultation was undertaken with state and security institutions. Almost all the institutions that were listed in that particular question were part of this particular review process. When we indicated earlier that we had to talk to key stakeholders, they were among the key stakeholders that we identified. So relevant security institutions, the Zambia Police, Immigration, SICTA, the banks were represented, private security firms were represented. So as much as possible, we tried to identify institutions that are currently working with closed circuit television, and they were called to the table and then part of the discussion.
Okay. As we wrap this thing up, what are your final, your concluding remarks?
I'm just calling on the members of the public to be responsible in the use of the CCTV, and with this development, just to take the opportunity to inform members of the public that going forward, once this bill becomes law, they will be regulated by law. They will be required to apply to the National Command Center to install CCTV, and also they will be regulated in the way they will be using their CCTV. With regard to our mandate as Zambia Law Development Commission, we remain open as an institution. Any person, any institution can approach us and bring to our attention a gap existing in a given piece of legislation, and request the Commission to work on that piece of legislation. We are here to reform the law, and we are doing this in two ways. We are looking at the existing laws and trying to identify the gaps or the things that are not suited to be associated with the social and political values of the Zambian people. Then we are also looking at areas where we do not have laws. So please feel free to approach the Zambia Law Development Commission. We are in Kabronga at plot number 26F along Chita Road, just opposite the South African High Commission, and you can bring your written submissions, you can come, we openly talk, or you can make your submissions through our website or social media platforms. Let's interact and encourage everyone to actually follow us on social media, because you will be constantly updated with the law reform processes that are going on within the Zambia Law Development Commission.
All right, Madam Ndlovu.
I believe Mila has adequately covered closing remarks for both of us. Thank you for having us on the program.
All right, so there you have it. We had the Zambia Law Development Commission on the show this morning. We're looking at the Closed Circuit Television, which is CCTV, Public Protection Bill 2021. And in studio we had Madam Hope Ndlovu Chanda, who is the Director of the Zambia Law Development Commission, Mr. Mwiwa Mwenda, who is the Research Coordinator at the Commission. This brings our show to an end until tomorrow between 6 and 9 from Crumbs and How. It's goodbye for now. We'll be back with RHB tomorrow.